someone else. So my point is this: nowadays in American policing, we slow that down. The Nashville scenario, we speed that up and go in and stop additional harm from happening. In an incident like this, we slow it down. So that's what you saw. And a lot of people have had questions and comments about why it took so long. And the reason why it took so long is because we wanted to get to the best possible outcome for a person involved in a mental health crisis, because that's what this was. There were certainly crimes that were committed, and we can get into that a little bit, but this was ultimately a person in a mental health crisis, and we needed to make the surrounding area safe, and then we needed to introduce several pieces of public safety and good government to that person to eventually create what happened here. And it was the safe surrender of a woman who was involved in a mental health crisis. So what assets were responsible for this coming to ultimately the best possible conclusion? The Fairfax County's Special Operations Division, particularly our SWAT team, and that SWAT team is commanded by Major Dalton Becker, who's to my left. Major Becker commands the Operational Support Bureau, and that includes our SWAT team, and it also includes our crisis negotiations team. Our crisis negotiators were there as well. And then we had co-responders there. I know that's something that you all have covered at length, not just here in Fairfax County, but beyond. We had co-responders there. We had clinicians assigned to our Merrifield Crisis Response Center. They were there. And when I say they were there, it's not just being physically present. They were negotiating and communicating with this woman during her 30-plus hours of crisis constantly. Sometimes they were in constant communication. Sometimes they weren't. There were periods of time where this woman would not communicate with us for a variety of reasons. There were several moments where she pointed a gun to her own head. That certainly caused all of us to have the pit of our stomachs drop. But they were there with us along the way. We also had to rely, because this was such a prolonged incident, we had to rely on SWAT team assistance from the Alexandria Police Department. So thanks to them, we had to rely on SWAT team assistance from the Virginia State Police. And we asked the George Mason University Police Department to come out as well, because they have drone assets just like we do. And they were instrumental as well. So the business community, my phone recording, a lot of interesting voice messages have been left on it for the last 72 hours. A lot of them were messages of support. Some were messages of frustration, particularly because the traffic issues. But I'll tell you, our business community and our community at large overwhelmingly stepped up and supported us emotionally with their words of support. Two car dealerships in particular, I want to thank, although it was more than just two commercial enterprises that assisted us along the way, but Don Buyer Subaru and She-He Honda left their doors open for us 24/7. Even when their employees went home from work, they left their doors open and their coffee pots on and restrooms. All those things are important during a prolonged incident like this one. And they were extremely supportive, and we could not have done that without them. So ultimately, it's our hope that this woman gets the treatment that she needs to lead a successful life, but she does face some criminal charges. We can get into that if you'd like, although I think you are already aware and have already reported on the nature of her criminal charges. This all started when we were asked by the Charles County Office of the Sheriff on the other side of the river in Maryland to check on the welfare of someone who was reported missing. And when our police officers get to this scene within minutes, they were approached by a victim of an abduction. Now, that victim is known to her abductor, who ended up being this woman in crisis, but nonetheless, she was a victim of an abduction. And when our police officers went to engage the woman who was in the Jeep, who ultimately was our person in crisis, a very brief, low-speed pursuit occurred, and she eventually came to rest. And that's when she produced a firearm, a handgun, and put it to her head. Our officers did what we asked them to do, particularly nowadays with our ICAT training, or which is the gold standard of de-escalation training, and they backed off. They saw a gun, they saw a person in the car, they backed off. They used time and distance to their, to their benefit, and they called for the SWAT team to come and handle a barricaded person inside of a vehicle, and that's what this was. So that vehicle was surrounded. Our hostage rescue vehicles, the large vehicles that you saw on the scene there, they have ballistic capabilities, and some people will have asked me, well, why bring out these types of vehicles to handle a person who's in some type of emotional or mental health crisis? Well, if not for those vehicles, we can't get our negotiators and our co-responders up to communicate with her. That's the only way we could do that, and we had to create an environment for them to communicate with this woman safely. So it allowed them to literally be feet away from this woman, and they communicated with her sometimes on the phone, sometimes through a PA system, and sometimes just yelling back and forth. All those things happened throughout the 30-plus hours. So I could go on to describe, I think, a timeline that you're already probably fully aware of, but I want to answer any questions that you may have, and certainly any tactical questions or considerations that we can answer. Major Dalton Becker is here to address those as well. So Drew Wilder.
Thanks, sir. I realize obviously you can't speak to everything that started this over in Maryland, but can you talk a little bit at all about what Brittany Copeland is alleged to have done, like kind of how this jump started in that initial when they leave Ms. Kingsbury's condo?
I'd say it starts probably before that, on Friday, the March 24th, when Brittany and the victim, who's known to Brittany, leave their apartment together in Laurel, Maryland. I'm not sure. Laurel covers 3 different jurisdictions: Howard, Prince George's, and Anne Arundel. I'm not sure exactly where in Laurel it happened, but that was caught on a Ring camera. And then on Sunday, the 26th, the victim's mom, and we're not identifying the victim because she's a victim, the victim's mom files a missing persons report with Laurel PD. So fast forward 2 more days, on Tuesday, March 28th, and the Charles County Office of the Sheriff asked us to check on the welfare for the missing person, the victim, in the 7200 block of Fordson Road in Alexandria, our part of it. So at 11, it was a 10:55 call for service or dispatch, I'm not sure which one. At 11 o'clock, our police officers, 11 a.m., arrive on the scene, and at 11:40 or so, they're approached by the victim, the woman who was abducted by Copeland, by Brittany. And that's when our officers attempted to approach her in the Jeep. She took off. We pursued, low speed pursuit, not a lot of distance, and that's when she stopped the car in the middle of Richmond Highway. And as our officers approached the car, they saw her produce a firearm and eventually put it to her head. And she put it to her head on several occasions throughout this whole ordeal.
Obviously, these wouldn't be charges that came from this county, but I guess if Ms. Copeland had made statements that the victim in this case left willingly. The victim's family alleges that Ms. Copeland shot at or in the direction of the victim in this case inside the condo, and that it was hardly willing. Which, I mean, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah.
I mean, if you get an abduction, you got, I guess.
So in retrospect, I certainly know all those things are being talked about, but the city of Laurel PD, has warrants on file where this all started for 2 counts of kidnapping, home invasion, assault 1st degree, assault 2nd degree, burglary 3rd degree, use of a firearm and commission of a felony, handgun on a person, loaded handgun on a person, and false imprisonment. So Laurel PD pursued those criminal charges and secured those criminal charges so they can speak, I think, to the nature, Drew, of those criminal charges. But Fairfax County charges include 2 counts of abduction, 2 counts of the use of a firearm and the commission of a felony, and 1 count of a felon in possession of a felony. But certainly we get contacted every day by outside jurisdictions who have warrants on file. So if part of the retrospective examination from your perspective includes the nature of those criminal charges, I'm sure Laurel PD would be happy to answer those.
Can you expand a little bit on the co-responder program and kind of help people understand a little bit more, why that's a priority for the county, why it's a priority for the department, and why that should be something that the community celebrates.
Well, I'll kick it off, and then I'll ask Major Becker to come up and offer some very specific examples of how meaningful it is. We're negotiating with this young woman because we want her to surrender. We want her to leave her gun in her car, which she ultimately did 30 hours later. We want her to come out, and we want to safely take her into custody and get her the help that she needs. So trained clinicians, trained by education and by years of experience, have just a different background and a different skill set than most police officers do. We certainly have police officers who are trained in crisis intervention. In fact, we have twice the average or percentage of CIT trained officers as the rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we're well over 40% of our officers are CIT trained, but CIT trained pales in comparison to being a certified clinician and someone who's educated and experienced who does nothing but deal with persons in crisis. We occasionally, if you're a CIT officer, will deal with a person in crisis, but it's not your full-time job. So we have people now with our co-responder program that's supported by the chairman and the Board of Supervisors and our Community Services Board and the Merrifield Crisis Response Center. It's all hands on deck for the co-responder program because it matters. And I'll ask Major Becker to come up and describe a couple very tangible negotiations that were going on that you may find of interest during the course of this standoff that our clinicians were able to successfully resolve and ultimately, I think, lead this young woman into deciding to do the right thing and give up. So, Major.
Hello, yes. Clinicians from our MCRC were there during the entire event, as were clinicians that are part of our co-responder unit, meaning riding with an actual police officer to calls as their full-time job. In this case, like others, they're very instrumental. They were negotiating, they're providing their clinician what they think the person is thinking. They're going to see things, and with their training and experience, they're going to look at things through a different lens than the police officer. So they were instrumental. We can't thank them enough, and they help us in many cases such as this.
Can you take us to the moment when she did finally surrender? What was said to her prior to that moment, and just really a play-by-play of just what happened there?
Sure. So 34 hours, we were actively communicating with her. At times, she would be communicating with us. Other times, she would not. The same thing over and over again. We're here to help. We're not here to hurt you. We want a peaceful resolution. Come out and we will treat you as fairly as we treat everyone. And, we can get through this. Obviously she was at times very emotional, rightfully so. So just trying to calm her nerves, to get her to understand that it can come to a peaceful resolution and all work out.
Did she ever bring up the victim?
At times, yes, definitely. Many times throughout the 34 hours.
What was she saying?
So I wasn't part of the negotiation team. As you can imagine, there's a couple different radio channels. I just remember her saying things, basically that they have an amicable relationship, things like that, trying to plead her case, I guess.
30 plus hours, is this considered one of the longest standoffs in Fairfax?
Well, thanks, Major. I think what you see now more than you have seen before, and this kind of gets back to my initial remarks, is that police departments like ours are taking the time that we have. We're in control, and because we're in control, we don't have to act with haste. There's no shot clock here. We can take our time, do the right thing, get the experts on the scene, like our co-responders, like the clinicians at the Merrifield Crisis Response Center, and we can handle this in a way that ultimately results in a safe resolution like we had on this particular case. The negotiators, they spoke to this woman about who they could put her in contact with, family members and friends, and what can we get you to eat, what can we get you to drink. All those things were going on throughout the course of this barricaded person incident, and they were successfully negotiated because we had experts doing doing that hard work.
Was that gun ever loaded?
Yes, the firearm was recovered. We're examining it right now. At one point in time, in exchange for some donuts, this woman threw out the magazine that was apparently inside of her semi-automatic pistol, and she did that in exchange for the donuts. So you can imagine, now that's a very tangible example, but there are other examples of some things that we were trying to get her to come around on that took a skilled negotiator time to do, and they had to establish trust and rapport with her to make that happen. Is it Mike? Max, I'm sorry, Max.
That's okay. Just as far as, I'm sure you had officers who came to their shift and left their shift, but when it happens and it's going on for over 30 hours, obviously there's a level of fatigue from your standpoint. Could you describe some of either, whether it's training or how you approach this specific situation as to how to not let fatigue impact how it ends?
Well, you can't wait to get in the midst of a crisis to figure out what you're going to do when you're in a crisis. So all the police departments in Northern Virginia and the National Capital Region, the DMV and beyond, have memorandums of agreement that exist, mutual aid agreements that exist. The National Capital Region Council of Governments, or COG, handles a great deal of those mutual aid agreements. So we knew going into this that we can only leave our SWAT team and our negotiators and even our traffic enforcement division, our motorist officers and patrol officers, we can only leave them out there for so many hours before we get them relieved, because, you know, fatigue is our enemy, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. So all those things were accounted for from the very moment we got there and started dealing with this situation. And from that, we were first relieved by Alexandria PD SWAT. When we came back, we were then relieved by the Virginia State Police SWAT. And we were able to use our internal personnel, whether it's traffic division, motors, or patrol officers, to relieve the many officers who were on the perimeter. And a lot of folks will ask, you know, why was such a long stretch of Richmond Highway shut down? And I think it was about a mile or so. I was out there, and I think it was about a mile. You can imagine, you have to think worst case scenario, if shots are fired. You know, how far can that bullet reasonably travel, and what or who could that bullet come into contact with? So all those things are considered when a perimeter, an inner perimeter and an outer perimeter, are established. And I think, and Major Becker was the incident commander, I think that we handled this very well, and in terms of our, not just interactions with the barricaded person, but with our inner and outer perimeters and our relationships with the business community and the community at large.
I guess kind of
True.
to that point you made there at the end, and I don't want to make a bad comparison here between, you know, another recent incident, but, you know, to those folks that were upset or felt that, you know, it was impacting it, and it was impacting their lives to some extent, but this is a case of it going the right way, right? And
Right.
this is the
Right.
most desirable outcome, sure, if it would have ended shorter, right? But
Right.
this is what you're working towards.
Absolutely, Drew. And, you know, I listened to most, if not all, of the voice messages that were left, and I know people get caught up in a moment, and if any of our lives are disrupted and our habits and our routines, it gets us out of sorts a little bit. But imagine if that were your sister, your mother, your daughter. I think if you put yourselves in the shoes of that family, you would be exhibiting more patience. And certainly the vast majority of people that we've come into contact with applaud the patience. They don't want us rushing in. They want us to be thoughtful. They want us to slow it down, use time to our advantage, use distance to our advantage, and I think we did all those things. Max.
Off that last point.
And then Megan. I see you over there.
Off that last point again, you mentioned time and distance. That's what you said as far as you get to that spot on Richmond Highway and you saw that the woman had a gun and no shots were fired. There was no exchange. You mentioned time and distance. Could you go through those initial moments and sort of how it came that it remained peaceful and started peaceful at the beginning?
Yeah, well, it's something that we're routinely very good at, both as a police department, and our profession is increasingly improving as well is taking advantage of training that exists under the umbrella of integrating communications assessment and tactics. It's known as ICAT training. It's been around since 2015 or so, and it encourages police officers to take advantage of distance if they can, and take advantage of time. I know when I was trained as a young police officer, it was get there in a hurry, handle it first, and often don't wait for backup, because sometimes waiting for backup 30-plus years ago was a sign of weakness. So our profession has come a really, really long way. And, you know, we really have ingrained in our culture that waiting for backup and asking other parts of our agency to help is something that's not only a good thing to do, it's required, and we train to it as well. Megan?
Is Ms. Copeland, is she being treated for any medical conditions, and then where is she right now?
I believe, and I'm looking for a head nod confirmation, she's at the Adult Detention Center in Fairfax County. I don't know what bond she has, probably no bond. We can confirm that.
No bond.
No bond. She's on no bond status.
We can get you that information.
Yeah, but while she's being held, the Adult Detention Center has those mental health assets available to them as well. You know,
Undergoing any kind of evaluation?
I can't speak to the internal procedures they have at the Adult Detention Center, but I imagine she is. So again, this is, you know, we all look at this as, you know, is it a criminal matter or is it a mental health matter? And oftentimes it's both, but ultimately for her, you know, if I'm her family and her friends, certainly understand that they're focused on her mental health. And you all probably saw, at least on the Channel 4 footage that ran when Brittany surrendered, you saw she had some, you can hear some of her friends and supporters in the background kind of, I guess, you know, telling her they love her. So she certainly has a following. There are a couple of unique things associated with this scenario as well, because it lasted so long, and she was able to make contact with folks, to include your profession in the media. And I'm aware of some of those interactions, and those interactions were shared with us as well. Megan?
Was your family there helping to assist during that process?
Yes, they were called in.
Come on, Katie.
I apologize. So when we first made contact with this woman, we were able to bring in our Special Operations Division, and they were able to make calls to the mother and to the family. I think her sister and her mother and a few other family members were brought in, and our clinicians were able to use them safely to be able to speak to her throughout this. And I think they not only came there to the scene, but we had some recorded speaking, her uncle and some other family members that were able to help do that. But it is wonderful to see that our officers were able to make contact with the mother and the family and bring the family down right away. I think it was less than 15 minutes they were doing that since. So.
Olivia, I'm calling on you like this is class. Any questions?
I guess this, you know, it sounds like this was a really successful, in terms of it could have gone a lot worse. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but were there any lessons learned or any new things you learned about barricade incidents through this 36 hours?
Yeah, well, I'll say this, the presence of a cell phone in the hands of a barricaded person is something that we're going to continue to explore. And our options to prohibit someone from communicating on a cell phone are challenged by available Wi-Fis that person can connect to. And that's about as sophisticated as I can get when I talk about IT. But there were certainly some challenges regarding her ability to contact others. Certainly, the contacts that we arranged by having her family present to communicate with her and having her family members record message that we can play to her were good things. But we just, I think, want to be careful going forward that a person in a mental health crisis does not contact someone or doesn't have the capacity to contact someone who could exacerbate the situation. That didn't happen, but that's certainly going through my mind. She's in a car, she's got a gun, and she's on the phone. Who's she on the phone with, and is that person being helpful or harmful? Luckily for us this time, you know, success has many fathers and mothers, and failure is an orphan. There's many fathers and mothers associated with this incident because it was successful. But that's one thing in particular that I want our team to explore is, how can we impact the ability of someone in a crisis from, or prohibit that person from communicating with others who may be harmful. That's certainly a lesson learned. And then, maybe another thing globally for, the journalists to think about and news organizations is when you get that phone call from a person who's in crisis, what do you do with that information? I know, for instance, one particular news organization contacted us immediately, and did a great job, and I intend on recognizing that news channel in the very near future. I think we all have to avoid, or maybe journalists or television stations need to avoid the temptation of putting that person live on a social media or other outlet that could unintentionally serve to make a complicated situation more complicated. So maybe that's an after-action thought or exercise as well. Megan.
Do we know when we can expect to have some kind of an arraignment for,
We can get you that information. I don't know exactly, we'll double check.
Olivia.
Body camera footage, drone footage, will that be made available, after the incident?
Yeah, we
Yes.
have some clips for you, we'll be able to get for you.
Yeah, the drones really come in handy with this, and you can imagine at night, one of the things that she was doing, again, she's in crisis, she's panicking. At night, we had light sources there so we could see inside the car, but she took an extraordinary step by using, I think, duct tape to tape up pieces of paper inside of her car so we couldn't see what was going on inside of the car. So that was a challenge that we had to work through as well. But the presence of the drones, they can get a lot closer than humans, certainly than our helicopter. Our helicopter was there, but the drones certainly give us the ability to get a whole lot closer. Yes, sir.
Mike, to you.
Mike, yep.
Yeah, so this slowed down approach, how recently would you say this sort of policy really started to make it into police departments? We've had these incidents before where people pull a weapon and that changes the whole scenario.
Yeah.
How recently have these policies kind of shifted toward this sort of?
So, Mike, I'd say the last 10 years, American policing, particularly those police departments like ours that have really done a lot to adopt this ICAT training. And again, ICAT training is something that was developed by the Police Executive Research Forum from a trip that they took to the UK back in 2015. And I was around back then, and I implemented it in a previous organization that I led. But I'd say it's not something brand new that police departments are adopting, but I think it's a consistent training nowadays to hurry up and wait. And there's nothing wrong with hurrying up and waiting, particularly if someone's in crisis. Now, the game changer in all that is an immediate deadly threat. So at any given time, we knew that this woman could have, she didn't, thank God, but she could have stepped out of that car with that firearm. And then we would be more responsive to that deadly threat. That didn't happen. Thank God it didn't happen. We had the right people and equipment and assets in place to deal with that if that did happen, but our commitment was to get her safely into custody, to get her the help that she ultimately needs.
I'm guessing in this case, there's no concerns that the gun was ever pointed towards your officers that you.
Now, Mike, I'm not aware that any time she pointed a firearm at any Fairfax County police officers. I know she pointed it at herself several times. Anybody else? So Drew Wilder's done. He already left.
I'm here.
All right, okay. Anything else, Drew?
I think I'm good.
You're good? All right, all right. I'm just teasing you. All right, okay. Well, thank you all for covering this. I think beyond the incident itself, it certainly speaks to, I think, some positive changes in American policing and practices. And we wish every scenario like this could have this level of successful outcome. And I think that's what we all strive for. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
And for everyone who doesn't have, we will be able to provide some pictures and video, and we'll get that to you. Just let us know if you haven't gotten that already, and we'll